So hi everyone, welcome along to Naturally Curious. I hope you're all really well today. So for October, we've been focusing on metabolic health, and today we have our third webinar on this topic. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Paul de Cellular, Scientific and Medical Director of NutriNed and Research Nutritionals, world-renowned speaker, and so much more for a webinar on mitochondrial longevity. The webinar is being recorded as always, and the recording and the slides will be available on our website from later today on our education page. And we will allow a few minutes at the end for questions. So do feel free to pop those in the chat and we'll come to those later. All right, I hope you enjoy the session and I will now hand you over to Paul.
Thank you for the introduction, Saf. It's great to be here with you and with the participants. And so today's lecture is actually is about the role of mitochondria in longevity therapy. So briefly, what I will cover in the next 40 minutes is the role of mitochondria. So we know that mitochondria are the powerhouses where ATP is formed, but mitochondria actually also generate free radicals, oxidative stress. And this is damaging our tissues, but it's also accelerating the aging process. So we will talk about research-based methods to reduce the oxidative stress. We will cover antioxidants, we will cover the lipid replacement therapy. And in the second part of my lecture, we will talk about mitochondrial dynamics. And mitochondrial dynamics is actually is the fact that mitochondria, at least if you're in good shape, mitochondria can adapt to circumstances. They can change forms, they can multiply as soon as we need more energy. And mitochondrial dynamics is key in longevity. It's a key factor that needs to be addressed also in chronic pathologies. Good, and at the end of the lecture, I will also briefly cover with you what the effects of insulin resistance and obesity are on mitochondrial dynamics and mitochondrial synthesis of ATP. Good, okay, let's start. So what I just showed you is still where we start from. Mitochondria make ATP. Mitochondria are the powerhouses. But next to making ATP, mitochondria actually also generate free radicals. So in a nutshell, and without going too deep into the mitochondrial system, we know that fuels like carbohydrates and fatty acids are burned in mitochondria. And electron carriers like NAD and FAD, they carry the energy to the electron transport chain. And in the electron transport chain, we transfer electrons, we pump protons out, and finally we make ATP. But in this process where electrons are transferred, we typically see a leakage, a loss of electrons. And the electrons that we lose react with oxygen, and this is how the free radicals or the reactive oxygen species are formed. Is the drama? Not really, because if we're in good health, we can neutralize the free radicals that generate from our metabolism. If not, then the free radicals or the remaining free radicals will cause damage, and they can damage all tissues. They can damage lipids, proteins, they can damage DNA, and we know that DNA damage is the basis of, for example, cancer development. But finally, the free radicals can also damage the mitochondria. And if we talk about mitochondrial damage, well, we talk about damage mainly on two levels. Level one is damage to mitochondrial DNA. And this is pretty remarkable because mitochondria are actually the only organelles with their own DNA. And the mitochondrial DNA actually comes from the mother, unlike the regular nuclear DNA that comes from both parents. And we know that the mitochondrial DNA is actually very sensitive, very vulnerable, because we don't have the protecting proteins around. So damage to the mitochondrial DNA is first stage of damage. second stage, where mitochondria are damaged, is actually on the level of the phospholipid layer. And if the phospholipids are damaged, well, we reduce our capacity to absorb fuels, to remove toxins, but we finally also reduce the capacity to make ATP, and finally, we will also generate more free radicals. Good. This is the bad news. Now let's talk about the good news, or the options that exist. Let's talk about antioxidants. Now, if we talk about antioxidants, it's important to understand that the free radicals are located in the intracellular space. So antioxidants needs to be bioavailable, bioactive, and actually they also need to access the intracellular space if we want them to be performed. Good. Glutathione happens to be probably the master antioxidant, but key is, of course, how do we get glutathione in the intracellular compartment? Good. If we say that glutathione is a powerful antioxidant, well, it's because glutathione can easily donate the missing electrons and neutralize the free radicals. And glutathione can actually also recycle other antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E so that they can be reused. Highest concentration of glutathione is in brain. And we know, especially in neurologic disorders and progressive neurologic disorders, that glutathione is key in a very complementary treatment plan. We have one particular situation where we're depleted of glutathione, and that's the overuse of paracetamol. If we take too much paracetamol in a long time space and in a high concentration, well, at some point, the liver is depleted. What could be fatal? You can die in 12, 24 hours. And according to the guidelines here, we can use IV forms of glutathione or eventually IV NAC, N-acetylcysteine. And if IV NAC is also an option, it's because cysteine is the first of the three amino acids we will run out from. So basically, both IV forms are possible in overconsumption of paracetamol, what is reducing glutathione. Now, does that mean that NAC is also a very good and efficient option to refill the intracellular stores if we are in an intracellular depletion of glutathione? Well, not really. It's not your most efficient method in that sense that we need a lot of enzymes and we need a lot of genes before NAC finally converts to glutathione. So IV NAC, yes, in a severe liver depletion, but it's not your best option in patients who are chronically depleted in glutathione. Good, but what's the definition of a chronic intracellular depletion? Can we measure glutathione? Well, yeah, you could measure glutathione in the cells, for example, in erythrocytes, but it doesn't make much sense to measure glutathione in blood because normally glutathione in blood will not travel to the intracellular compartment because there's a negative concentration gradient. Good. How do we know from a perspective standpoint if we're depleted in glutathione in the intracellular level? Well, basically we depend on different indirect markers like liver enzymes, GGT, or the different oxidant markers or inflammatory markers like homocysteine, CRP. And this is actually typical in medical care. It's not black or white. You need to understand the entire situation, and that's usually what we do to diagnose an intracellular depletion of glutathione. But of course, I was talking about IV glutathione. IV glutathione is a massive dosage. Is this sufficient to also refill the intracellular store? Yeah, sure, because it's a massive doses, but we need to understand that the access of IV glutathione and just refilling the intracellular stores is just temporarily, unless you work with IV forms every 2-3 days. So, at the end, we still need other forms that really ensure a good intracellular delivery. So let's talk about oral liposomal forms. Let's talk about trifortify. The idea is that the glutathione is wrapped with liposomes. Liposomes have the same structure as cell membrane, so fusion is the next step, and this is a very good guarantee to refill the intracellular stores. How do we know? Well, we conduct studies, and this particular study, what is still the only study on oral liposomal glutathione, or the only consistent study on oral liposomal glutathione, and we published the results in 2018 in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Now, for us in this study, it was very important to show how oral liposomal glutathione could refill the intracellular store. But next to this, we also wanted to show the bioactivity, the effects on oxidative stress and even on immunity. Now, if I just quickly share the results with you, you will see in red that the intracellular concentration of glutathione measured in erythrocytes was increased with 28% after 2 weeks. Daily dosage, 1 teaspoon a day. Good. Now, if we have, after 2 weeks, more intracellular glutathione, well, the effects on the oxidative stress, if you look at the green graphs, are also obvious. The upper one is the effect on the ratio oxidized on reduced glutathione, and you see that it's decreased, but also the effect on 8-isoprostane, what is the marker for lipid peroxidation, was also conducted in the study. In blue, you'll see the effects on immunity, more precisely on natural killer cells, because we know that an excess of free radicals is breaking down our natural killer cells, but also our B and T lymphocytes in the adaptive part. But here we show that if you have more intracellular glutathione after 2 weeks, well, automatically you severely increase the NK cell activity. So this is the study, this is the evidence, and now, well, we immediately understand what the practical applications are, especially in chronic pathologies, in chronic infections, chronic reactivating infections. This, of course, next to the fact that glutathione is also important in our detoxification pathway. But good, let's return to the topic of the day, oxidative stress, mitochondria. Next to antioxidants like oral liposomal glutathione, it's also good to consider methods to repair mitochondria, because if we repair mitochondria, we automatically also limit the release or the production of free radicals. And the lipid replacement therapy, the repair system of mitochondria using phospholipids and antioxidants, well, it was introduced nearly 25 years ago with anti-factor and the first studies on patients with cancer. And we saw in the studies on anti-factor that the cancer-related fatigue improved, but also in a general way, the side effects that we see in chemotherapy. That was the introduction with anti-factor. Then came the second generation, ATP fuel, studies conducted by Gard Nicholson on Lyme patients and other patients with chronic infections or chronic pathologies. And now we're currently in the third generation with ATP 360. Now, the information that I would like to share with you today is actually are the results of the study published in 2021, and participants were, well, didn't really have a real medical diagnosis, but all were severely fatigued. And we followed up the results after 2 months using ATP 360, 3 capsules in the morning. Good. The results. Well, we see a reduction in fatigue with 52%, what is, I think, very, very good. We already see a reduction in fatigue in 35% after 1 week, but also concentration improved. Sleep quality also improved with 68%. If you repair circadian rhythm, you have more energy during the day, you sleep better at night. But also objective inflammatory markers like TNF alpha were measured and also decreased. Good. Now, next to oxidative stress, let's talk about mitochondrial dynamics. And what is mitochondrial dynamics? Well, mitochondrial dynamics, in essence, is the fact that mitochondria constantly adapt. There is some kind of constant quality control depending on circumstances. And circumstances might be, okay, we need more energy. And we see that mitochondria in these circumstances, at least if you're in good health, well, they can adapt, they can change. And that is what they do with fusion and fission. And fusion actually means that 2 mitochondria can go together and commonly share materials like mitochondrial DNA and proteins, or depending on the circumstances, mitochondria can also decide to split to eliminate the damaged part. That is what we call fission. And finally, in fission, we will have a network with smaller but more manageable mitochondria. So mitochondria can adapt, can switch to different forms to make sure that anytime you have an optimal mitochondrial network. Now, this adaptation, what we call mitochondrial dynamics, is disturbed in chronic pathologies. We know that it's disturbed, for example, in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer or Parkinson, but also in other chronic pathologies. And this is actually why the bigger part of the chronic pathologies are also mitochondrial dysfunction. That means that in a total complementary approach, we also need to see what we can do on mitochondrial level. Good. Next to this, mitochondria can even multiply. Yeah, can multiply. So depending on situation, for example, if you need more energy, and once more, if you are in good shape, well, mitochondria can generate more and new mitochondria, what we call mitochondrial biogenesis. And the mechanism behind mitochondrial genesis goes actually via PGC1 alpha. That's the switch. It's the switch for the mitochondrial biogenesis. It's what we call the transcription factor. And the transcription factor is activated as soon as the sensors, AMPK and sirtuins, as soon as they are informed of the more demand of energy. That's the system how it is. But I will show you and explain you the details. First, if PGC1 alpha is the switch, it's a transcription factor. And what is a transcription factor? Well, a transcription factor is a molecule that binds to the promoter region of the genes, and the transcription factor will always decide on the expression of the genes. That's actually the basis of epigenetics versus genetics. Good. And the transcription factor will switch on mitochondrial biogenesis as soon as the two sensors, sirtuins and AMPK, are alarmed. So, for example, you're doing endurance sports or exercise, or you're fasting, or you're having an ice cold shower in the morning, different circumstances where we need more energy. Well, the sensors are alarmed and they activate PGC1 alpha. Good. AMPK, for example. AMPK, let's say, okay, you're running, and at some point ATP goes down, or we need to say the ratio AMP-ATP goes up. And then the sensor AMPK will make decisions. AMPK will say, okay, let's stop wasting energy. Let's stop wasting energy to cell growth, to lipid synthesis, and let's really optimize system. And this is where AMPK will activate PGC1 alpha by phosphorylation, and you will make more mitochondria. Practical application: in chronic overnutrition or obesity, this system doesn't work. So the system where you make new mitochondria is blocked, is inhibited in obesity. You're in the incapability to make more mitochondria. The system is blocked. But I will tell you more about insulin resistance and obesity soon. Good. Now, metformin. Now that we have more, I hope, understandable information on the mechanism of mitochondrial biogenesis, let's try to understand why metformin has been used for 30, 40 years in what we call anti-aging therapies. So metformin or glucophage was the molecule for mitochondria. Well, I think now we have the information and I can show you how metformin works, because metformin is actually blocking complex 1 in the electron transport chain. If we block complex 1, automatically we lower ATP, or AMP-ATP goes up, and yes, automatically we activate AMPK, and AMPK activates PGC1 alpha, and we make new mitochondria. Okay, this is clear, this is understandable, but we need to take into consideration that metformin has a couple of side effects. The first side effect, well, check kidney function and check creatinine clearance. Because if kidney function is compromised, metformin might induce metabolic acidosis or heart failure. 2 publications. Take into consideration, check kidney function. Metformin, especially in chronic use, will also induce B12 deficiency. And other publications show the effect of metformin on muscle mass, on muscle tissue, on lean mass, so higher risk for sarcopenia. And we know that this is a major risk in longevity. When we talk about really good complementary longevity therapies, we always talk about resistance training, strength training, because this is the way you anticipate on the loss of muscles. Muscles are not only a structural tissue, no, it's also a metabolic tissue. The bigger part of the insulin-mediated glucose metabolism is controlled via muscles, so muscles are important. Other side effects of metformin are the effects on gut microbes, so dysbiosis, and more precisely, a reduction in the synthesis of the short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, with also the metabolic impact. So, okay, we have the good sides, and we have a couple of side effects that we really need to take into account. Do we have alternatives for metformin? Well, alternatives exist, and basically combinations with berberine and cinnamon. But berberine needs to be a very powerful extract, easily 96-97% from Berberis aristata. And cinnamon, not the pure raw cinnamon, it might contain coumarin derivatives, but we prefer to work with certified patented forms like cinnulin. And here we see in the combination of berberine and cinnamon that we have the same effects on AMPK and mitochondrial biogenesis, but we don't see the 5 side effects that I just showed you. Good. Practical clinical application. These 2 forms with the research behind is what we released as glycosense. And glycosense is used not only for mitochondrial biogenesis, so longevity in a general way, but glycosense is also what we use for glucose metabolism. So the studies show the effect on fasting glucose and also on glycation. And we know that glycation is a very important marker. It's the marker that shows the potential complications. So we have one composition in mitochondrial biogenesis and insulin sensitivity, or I should say insulin resistance. Good. Let's go back to our sensors, because I introduced you how AMPK activates PGC1 alpha, but we also have another sensor, sirtuins. Sirtuins do the same. They capture the information, oh, we need more energy, and sirtuins also activate PGC1 alpha. But we know that sirtuins only work well if they have sufficient NAD as a cofactor. And this might be a problem because we expect NAD to decline when we age. So the biosynthesis of NAD is reduced when we get older. Also, the consumption is more. So also here, when we'll talk about methods and tools to optimize systems, well, the supplemental use of NAD or its precursors, nicotinamide riboside, will be very important. So next time, when you're feeling angry or when you're fatigued, maybe this doesn't feel very comfortable, but think that you are actually inducing or upregulating your natural systems of mitochondrial biogenesis and longevity. Okay, other molecules that can really be helpful in this mechanism of mitochondrial biogenesis is nitric oxide. And if we say nitric oxide, if we talk about nitric oxide, well, usually we talk about cardiovascular health. The more nitric oxide we make in our endothelium, the more nitric oxide will cross the endothelial border to the smooth muscles around the arteries. And nitric oxide can there activate CGMP to relax the smooth muscles around the artery. So the more nitric oxide you make in your endothelium, the better you can relax the smooth muscles around your arteries. And this is actually what you need to control your blood pressure, your coagulation, but also to ensure vasodilatation if you need more blood perfusion, for example, in exercise. So nitric oxide, key enzyme in arterial or vascular, cardiovascular longevity, but nitric oxide also here on mitochondrial level is another molecule that is activating PGC1 alpha, certainly something that we can include in our synthesis or analysis. And the last molecule that I cover here is PQQ. I'm sure you've heard of PQQ in some mitochondrial compositions. Well, yes, PQQ can also directly activate PGC1 alpha. So we have a couple of molecules that we can use if we want to optimize a system that is so important in longevity, but also in a general way, in the way we address chronic pathologies. Good. The analysis of the mechanism, and especially research-based options to improve mitochondrial dynamics and mitochondrial biogenesis, well, are key in mitochondrial resistance, but mainly also in longevity therapies. So where are we? Well, on the left side, lifestyle factors. And I'm sure many of you do this kind of things every day. Ice cold showers in the morning, fasting or intermittent fasting, sports, exercise, so lifestyle factors. And on the right side, the molecules that actually, work together with the lifestyle factors to finally optimize and ensure mitochondrial dynamics. So going back to this part, we have more energy demand, the sensors AMPK and sirtuins are alarmed. They they activate PGC1 alpha, so we need NAD, we need nitric oxide, we need PQQ, but very important, everything that I'm saying and I'm showing you on mitochondrial biogenesis doesn't work in inflammation. Inflammation is key, is the disruptor of everything. And this is also how we understand functional medicine and longevity medicine. We always start from inflammation. No, remember, first thing we do, we need to address all the triggers that contribute to inflammation. We ask how sleep quality is in our patients. We check diet, we check gut, we check underlying infections. All the factors that possibly contribute to inflammation need to be addressed. There's no magic bullet or whatever. It's a total approach with lifestyle factors, molecule, and of course, inflammation being your enemy number one. Easier or better understandable, the practical application. So what could be a total mitochondrial longevity protocol with the oral liposomal glutathione, Tri-Fortify, 1 teaspoon a day, lipid replacement therapy, also referring to the published study, ATP 360, 3 capsules during breakfast. We talked about NAD and PQQ. Well, we have Cognifuel, what is a composition that contains NAD, PQQ, but this very composition also contains coffee oil fruit extract. And if we use coffee oil fruit extract, I'm sure that the practitioners who work in the Bredesen protocol know this extract. It's coffee fruit extract is not caffeine. It's not the coffee beans. It's the fruit where the beans grow in. And the coffee oil fruit extract actually has been researched because it's increasing the expression of BDNF, brain neurotrophic factors, with 143%. So in Cognifuel, we have one composition that works on mitochondrial biogenesis and neurogenesis. And finally, my number 4, NOx support is not only cardiovascular health, but is also one of the molecules that directly improves mitochondrial biogenesis. Good. Now, before we stop, five more minutes to show you what the impact of obesity and insulin resistance are on mitochondria. And we actually see two effects. First effect, abdominal fat or belly fat, it's not just hanging there. It's like an endocrine organ. It's causing inflammation. And in abdominal fat, we also automatically have a reduction of adiponectin. And if adiponectin is reduced, well, we shut down the system of mitochondrial biogenesis. That's one impact. The other impact that I will explain you is the fact that in obesity and insulin resistance, mitochondria are poorly effective. They hardly make ATP, they make a lot of lactic acid, and this is also really something we need to take into consideration, especially in total treatment plans where we also work on lifestyle factors, physical exercise, we need to consider the fact that these patients are compromised in or limited in physical activity. So we really need to start with a simple physical plan and gradually work up. Good. Details. Adiponectin. What is adiponectin? It's released by adipose tissue. If you have a lot of abdominal fat, adiponectin is low, is poor, what automatically means that you have poor insulin sensitivity. And adiponectin here, well, shuts down the activation on PGC1 alpha. So everything that I showed you, mitochondrial biogenesis, the system that we have to build more mitochondria, it is disrupted in insulin resistance or obesity. Number two, second impact, the impact on ATP synthesis in insulin resistance and obesity. Well, usually when everything goes well, glucose in glycolysis first go to pyruvate. Okay, 1 unit of glucose generates 2 units of ATP. And then, if everything's okay, your pyruvate will cross the mitochondrial membranes to the TCA cycle and the oxidative phosphorylation. And finally, 1 unit of glucose generates 36 units of ATP. This is in the best conditions. Now, okay, first situation, anaerobic glycolysis. And if you want to understand what anaerobic glycolysis is, well, you need to imagine a marathon runner. Okay, marathon runner, at the end of the race, is exhausted. There's no oxygen in blood. So this poor guy has the first step of glycolysis, okay, to pyruvate. And then the pyruvate actually doesn't access the next part of the TCA cycle in the oxidative phosphorylation. No, in these anaerobic conditions, well, your pyruvate will actually only ferment to lactate, and this is necessary to recycle NAD. So finally, the marathon runner is hardly making ATP, is making a lot of lactic acid and sore muscles, and he stops the race or whatever, he goes in cramp. This is anaerobic glycolysis. And so this situation with limited ATP synthesis is, for example, also what we see in cancer. In cancer, well, mitochondria shift to glycolysis, to aerobic glycolysis. And the reason or the mechanism behind, many theories exist. The Warburg theory is the most accepted. And this theory says that mitochondria in cancer shift to this system because cancer is a fast development and we need fast delivery of ATP, and this glycolysis only delivers 2 units, but it's delivered immediately. And cancer, and especially cancer developments, likes lactic acid because lactic acid is causing necrosis. You make space for the cancer development. And of course, yes, cancer cells have adapted to this disadvantage and they increase glucose uptake. And this is why sugar and carbs and glucose is not good in cancer patients. Okay, now here in the situation that we discussed today, what is insulin resistance and obesity, well, we see that the 2 essential steps to finally go down the mitochondrial ATP synthesis, well, the 2 essential steps, the oxidative decarboxylation and the oxidative phosphorylation, are both inhibited. So it means that in insulin resistance and obesity, well, you're limited to glycolysis, so only 2 units of ATP. And next to this, you know that the network of mitochondria is also limited because mitochondrial biogenesis was inhibited by adiponectin. So that the mitochondrial network and capacity to make ATP are very limited in insulin resistance and obesity. And these patients make a lot of lactic acid. And lactic acid actually also promotes angiogenesis and carcinogenesis. So we need to say that in insulin resistance or chronic inflammation or obesity, the risk to develop cancer is more pronounced. But also take into consideration in a total approach where you need GLP-1 agonists or other methods, whatever, understand that at the start of your treatment, the mitochondrial capability is very limited, not much ATP, a lot of lactic acid, so really build up your personalized physical exercise plan. Good. Resistance training, that's what we need. This is essential in longevity. It's not about bodybuilding, but it's about anticipating on the decline of muscle mass, what we automatically have when we are getting older. And if you can anticipate with resistance training, well, you know, your metabolic activity will be better, and not only your insulin-dependent glucose metabolism. Well, not only that, here we have the evidence that resistance training also acts on AMPK and PGC1 alpha. It's also a documented and researched method to improve mitochondrial biogenesis. Good. So, I hope you like the intervention. What we discussed today is the fact that mitochondria really are not only the powerhouses where ATP is formed, they generate free radicals, and mitochondria, if you're in good shape, well, they adapt to circumstances, they can change forms, they can multiply with mitochondrial biogenesis, and we covered research and information and different methods to optimize mitochondrial biogenesis, what is key in our longevity therapy. So I thank you for your attention. I go back to Saf, and maybe we have some questions from the audience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. That was a really brilliant presentation. And yeah, I kind of feel like I need to go over it again and just really dig into some of that because there was a lot there. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So yes, we do have a bit of time for questions. So feel free to pop anything in the Q&A box. I do see one question here. So somebody has asked, would PQQ supplementation be inappropriate in a case where persistent or unresolved CDR was suspected? I believe that's cell danger response.
Well, so the question is, we showed how PQQ is optimizing mitochondrial biogenesis with this direct effect on PGC1 alpha. And the question is that PQQ might be something that you don't consider in specific circumstances like the danger response. I don't know. If it's published, I don't know. I would like to see the information. No, I can't really give an answer on that. In my eyes, PQQ is an inoffensive molecule, but if someone researched and also saw negative effects, well, I'm excited to see the research.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And someone else has asked if you could compare dietary lactic acid metabolism versus lactic acid production during exercise. So I guess they're asking how much do we metabolize versus how much we produce?
Oh.
Sorry, I've got all the difficult questions today.
This is a very mathematical question, and this really depends on so many parameters. This kind of exercise is actually the exercise that they do for athletes, because it's very individual, and depending on the specific parameters, but also the respiratory parameters, the kind of sport, the kind of exercise you do, then you can really calculate and see how much lactic acid you form in metabolism. But no, this is really extremely mathematical. But yeah, especially in academic level and in clinics with doctors specialize in performance and in sports, they can do this kind of exercise.
That's fair. I'd love to ask you a question about glutathione, and if somebody has a genetic SNP, so they know they're not producing glutathione effectively or possibly at all, would there be any difference in how that person should supplement glutathione? Should they take more, or is there anything additional they should be considering?
Well, you know, the SNP or the polymorphism exists and is usually also worsening the situation, especially in patients exposed to toxicity, environmental toxicity, or even mold, mycotoxins, whatever. Well, do we, let's say, if there is a SNP, well, there's no hesitation. You need to use the glutathione, and the glutathione also in a form that is ready to use. So the IV form was discussed in specific circumstances. We discussed also the oral application, the oral supplementation with Tri-Fortify. So let's say that patients with a poor detoxification, what might be the result of a polymorphism of glutathione, are certainly the first in the row to have supplemental glutathione. Yes. Do we need larger doses? Usually, you know, the dosage of 1 teaspoon a day of the Tri-Fortify corresponds with the needs. We have some situations of toxicity or severe neurologic concerns where we sometimes double the dose. But in a general way, it's the general doses that we use. And I also need to say that in some patients who are on IV glutathione therapy, we actually combine. So they are usually on IV glutathione, let's say once a week or once a month. And next to this, they also take the oral supplementation every day to make sure that the levels are really optimized.
Great. Okay, that's really helpful because I think this is definitely something that comes up in clinic quite frequently. And also, obviously, we stock many glutathione supplements here, and the doses vary a lot. And yours is at the higher end with this, I think it's 450 milligrams, but some of them are much lower, maybe 200. And so it's just good to understand what is optimal, really.
Yeah, well, what counts is actually the result, and the result, and therefore, of course, you need the studies, you need the information that show you what you can expect as a result starting from that dose. But I think, Sav, it's a very good remark because I can imagine that you know, when you compare different forms, you see, okay, 400 milligram glutathione, 2 grams, 4 grams, or whatever. Well, but finally, everything depends on, okay, how much is delivered. And I think we clearly discussed today that it needs to be delivered in the cells to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were really great studies that you shared there as well. One other question has come through. Would such supplementation be adapted for patients with cancer and having chemotherapy? I mean, I think the approach, if someone already has cancer, we'd have to reconsider the whole approach. What would you say about that?
Well, I think it's a very good question. We don't like to standardize in a general way, so every patient is different. In cancer patient and especially patients on chemotherapy, depending on the kind of chemotherapy, well, we like to set up a more specific or personalized treatment plan. So, for example, if it's paclitaxel as a chemotherapy, then we use glutathione. But you know, I don't really like generalized standards protocols. Let's see what makes sense in every single patient's.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I think that is all the questions answered. So I will leave it there and just say a huge thank you again for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from you. And yeah, it was a really fantastic presentation. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
As mentioned before, the slides and the recording of the presentation will be available on our website from later today. You just need to be logged into your account, and then you'll see the education button. And if you click through, you'll see the webinars section in there. So next month, we're moving on to a new theme, which will be fertility. And we do have 3 amazing webinars lined up for that. So do check your follow-up email later today for some details about those and your links to register. And yes, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the session. And thank you again, Paul. And we'll see you all again soon. Take
Thank
care.
you,
Enjoy
Seth.
the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.